Let's get in focus.
You're on.
Welcome back. You're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida. And my practice is by the same name, A Path to Wellness is the name of the show and the name of the practice in Northeast St. Petersburg, Florida. And we see patients from all over, not just Tampa Bay area, not just Florida, but from all over the country and all over the world, frankly, at times. But not all of the world celebrates Thanksgiving. I know that we do in the U.S. Excuse me, boy. We do in the U.S.
It's supposed to be our freedom.
And
our celebration.
Something along those lines, right?
Yeah.
But
I shouldn't say freedom.
It's also celebrated in Canada just a little bit earlier in the year, like in October instead of November, I believe. So, you know, it brings to mind, we were having a little conversation this morning about food and how food is affected, our food choices are affected by these holidays, and what good food choices might be, etc. And, you know, I do see people coming in who gained a few pounds for the holidays, eating things that they might not otherwise have eaten, but because it's the holiday, you know, that's basically, it's like an exemption, right? You're exempt from the normal restraints of your diet and you know, your lifestyle, and you can do whatever, eat whatever, right? And it's kind of similar in some ways to what I hear sometimes from people who have been around a while, like, you know, people in their 70s, 80s, and they think, well, you know, they made it this far, they've earned the right and to, you know, they've earned the, not just the right, I mean the right, of course they have the right, but they've earned the exemption or whatever to selective eating, you know, watching what they put in their bodies. And in fact, in a lot of cases, those people are even more vulnerable to the problems that come with bad choices. So, you know, they're simply hastening their demise by choosing to not worry about everything they're eating, or not pay attention to it, I should say. Not to worry about, but to pay attention to be aware of the choices that we're making and how they affect our bodies. Okay? And there are levels of understanding of those effects that are, let's say, that are unusual. You know, like my understanding of how food affects your body is very, very detailed. The understanding of the average physician about how food affects your body is somewhat reasonable, and the understanding of the average layperson of how food affects your body is not the greatest. And then the understanding of the average person who then chooses to eat fast food and that frequents the fast food choices is probably worse than average, if not, well, maybe that is average in this country, in the U.S. I mean, the standard American diet, you know, people are eating fast food all the time. Mm-hmm. And there are some very, very good ways of eating that can be very helpful to you physically and mentally. In other words, that affect your psychology as well as your physiology. And specific areas of your physiology as well, like specific areas. like your breathing, your heart, your blood sugar regulation, all of these types of things, your cholesterol level even potentially, but all of these kinds of things are affected by specific food choices. If you're inflamed, if you have arthritis, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, an autoimmune disorder, you know, even lupus can be improved through proper choices in the diet. Now, why don't people generally pay attention to these things, or why aren't they made aware of these things? Well, because conventional medicine, the practice is basically not to pay much attention to diet and to lean on the drugs to make up for any variability that might occur because of diet. Now, I mean, you will hear things like, you know, stay off the salt, or drink more water, or, you know, these kinds of things, or stay away from the sugar. But that's, frankly, I think that's like intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. How's that? I mean, it's just, duh. So do we need to hear these things from the health practitioners? Not really. We need to go much deeper and really understand how food affects your physiology. And of course, I've had a lot of shows that I've done that I've gotten into various aspects of this. But I'm going to try and kind of go over how specific choices might be affecting your health in specific ways. So maybe what we'll do is we'll look at disorder by disorder, something along those lines. Like, for example, let's start with blood sugar regulation. Don't know where I'm going with it, but here we are, blood sugar regulation. So with blood sugar regulation, if you're choosing foods that are high glycemic index, and you can look up glycemic index of foods by looking at glycemicindex.org, I believe it is, on the web. That's from the a place that I got exposed to when I was in Australia, which is the University of Sydney. They've done a lot of work researching the glycemic index of specific foods, and so it's something that you can simply search for and understand better what the glycemic index is for each choice you make. So I'm going to double check the address for that, but I believe it's glycemicindex.org. Let me check. Yeah. So let's see.
While you are
we on? I don't think we're on the Sydney site here, so it switched me over to something in German, so I'm not quite right. But anyway, if you look up glycemic index, I'm sure you can find your way to that kind of thing. So the glycemic index of foods is important because it gives you an idea on a scale. It's glycemicindex.com perhaps. Let me see. Yeah, that's the University of Sydney. It's .com. So glycemicindex.com. That's spelled GLYCEM as in Mary IC. Glycemic index INDEX.com. You can search for specific foods and find out the glycemic index of each food. And that can be a good guideline when you're making choices. You know, you can be selective about those choices and bring that glycemic index down. So who's this helpful to? Well, obviously people with diabetes would be one of the major ones. Now, unfortunately, I often hear from people with diabetes, and I'm talking even type 2 and type 1 diabetes, that they don't discuss food, they don't discuss diet choices with their primary care physician or they may go to a walk-in clinic or something, and they don't discuss these things with them. They just discuss how much insulin they're taking, or how much metformin they're taking, or these kinds of things, glucophage. And unfortunately, I think some of that is because time is short, and people in the conventional system are burdened with quite a bit of management of the health of many, many people. So, and in that system, it's not really about managing health so much as keeping you from becoming sick or worse. Okay, and from my point of view, it's more about managing health. It's more about preventative care as well as dealing with any situations that may be going on. So I address a current health concern at the same time as trying to set things up so that you're on a path to wellness. So that's the whole idea behind the name of the practice and the show that you're listening to. So in terms of glucose regulation or sugar regulation, there are many ways of handling this, but one of the first things is you can take a look at the glycemic index and type in a specific food. If you go to the website set up by the University of Sydney in Australia, let's see, I'll use that and do a little search. So, for example, food name contains, let's say, we'll say sweet potato. Looking for sweet potato. Glycemic index, straight sweet potato boiled, is 44. Okay, that's kind of a mid-range. Sweet potato peeled, cubed, boiled for 30 minutes is 46. If we look at just the sweet potato, the orange fleshy part, peeled and cut into pieces and boiled for 8 minutes, it's 61. If it is all the various forms, the glycemic index changes along with the changes in the treatment of each one. So the glycemic index is lower in its more natural form without any alteration, and then as we cut it up, we cook it or steam it, these kinds of things. Each of those steps of refinement breaks it down further and further, and therefore makes the sugar go into the blood that much faster, and therefore the glycemic index goes up. And that means that the higher the glycemic index, the worse it is in terms of blood sugar. The more blood sugar you're going to be getting, the higher the blood sugar level. So that's one example. So you can research all the different things that you choose, but looking at the holidays, back to that subject, sweet potatoes are one of the big ones. Pumpkin pie, cranberry sauce. If you look at the cranberry sauce you're using, if you're using cranberry over the holidays, the components of it are very important. So if it's just natural cranberries, the glycemic index is going to be much, much lower. If you are using a cranberry compote, I guess we'd call it, where you have the mix of the gelled section and maybe some of the cranberry or maybe just all gel. Well, that's obviously been processed to get that form. Probably is essentially derived from the juices. And then what they've done often, if you get it straight from the juice, that's pretty bad already. But what they often do is they add corn syrup to the mix. And so what we have there is a situation where the corn syrup, first of all, is not processed correctly by your liver. And we get a situation over time where there's a buildup of that, and then we end up with fatty liver. Also, there are going to be other aspects to the mix there. You know, you're going to have high fructose corn syrup. The corn syrup being corn, then is also likely, very likely, to be GMO, genetically modified. So you have genetically modified food that in some lab experiments has been shown to cause cancer in lab animals. And then you're adding to it sugar, which actually, a form of sugar, which actually fuels the development of cancer. So the possibilities are that you're contributing to a potential future health problem. Let's put it that way. But of course, back to glycemic index, high fructose corn syrup in a significant quantity is going to have a pretty negative effect on processing because it's not recognized properly through your liver. So you're going to end up with a lot of that being in your blood, and you know, you're going to have an increase in blood sugar, and therefore if you're producing insulin, if you're diabetic, you're producing insulin if you're type 2. But in some cases, and I think conventionally we see type 1 as being an individual who's not producing insulin typically, although I might debate that subject a little bit. But the point is that if you're not producing insulin properly, then you're going to have issues with the processing of the sugars. So with type 2 diabetes, what we have is insulin resistance, which means that your pancreas starts pumping out the insulin to deal with the sugar, and it starts to work a little bit, but the response of your body is a lagging effect. In other words, it's not going to respond immediately if you have insulin resistance. If your insulin resistance is significant, it takes a while before there's enough insulin produced. In other words, a threshold needs to be met before it starts doing its job within your body. So this is kind of a complicating thing with diabetes. And then there's also the situation of hypoglycemia, where you may be producing, for example, you may have a situation where you spike in insulin and then you get very low blood sugar, and you may have issues with the low blood sugar. You might be passing out, you might be feeling faint or feeling dizzy, you might feel anxious. In fact, if you go without food for a while and you get extremely anxious, that can be a sign of hypoglycemia. So, you know, this idea of going too high or too low in sugar on a regular basis is not a great thing for us. It's actually a very aging process. It speeds up aging in our bodies. So what we want to do is help our bodies by not eating foods that throw that balance out, not eating foods that require surges of insulin. And by eating balancing foods that offset that function. For example, if you're having something that's a little sweet, then having something with protein can balance that, can offset that, because that's going to stimulate the release of the opposing hormone to insulin, which is glucagon. And that's going to help to balance out the blood sugar and keep it more steady. And then also a little fat can help to make the tendency to sort of spike those two hormones more balanced and more smoothly regulated. So these are all issues with regard to how to eat to manage blood sugar. Okay, so that's one example. That would be related to any of the blood sugar regulation issues. Diabetes of any sort, and there's type 1, type 2, and actually Alzheimer's is considered by some to be type 3 diabetes.
Really?
Right, so we have a glucose management issue there that can interfere with brain activity and can be related to at least dementia. And then we have, there's a lot of interesting stuff related to this, but also then we have hypoglycemia. And hypoglycemia is obviously complicated when you are continually throwing foods into your body that are going to throw off your blood sugar regulation. Okay, so remember that glycemicindex.com site, not .org, .com. And when you are eating, if you start looking up the foods, you'll start to become more familiar with what you might be doing to your body that could be throwing off your blood sugar regulation. All right. And sugar in and of itself is not the only thing there. We're talking about spiking insulin. When you spike insulin, your insulin response goes high. Not only does it grab onto the sugars in your blood and basically pull them up into your muscle tissue, which, by the way, can relate to if you have enough muscle mass. So weight-bearing exercise can help this out, because if you're improving your muscle mass, you're going to process sugar in your blood more efficiently. So that's another little key item there. But beyond all that, insulin response actually causes a change in terms of oxygen absorption. So what happens is the oxygen level in your bloodstream goes down, and the oxygen transfer to your muscles goes down. So you're essentially asphyxiating your body tissues when you get too much insulin. And this can lead to a lot of the disorders associated with aging and make somebody who's experiencing the signs and symptoms that come along with diabetes even worse off. And adding to that, one of the other things we talked about was breathing, right? If you have asthma, if you have COPD, if you have allergic asthma, any of these situations can be exacerbated by not eating a well-balanced diet that helps you with blood sugar regulation. So helping to control those levels will also help you to improve your breathing. You see, so this is just from the point of view of diet. I haven't talked here about all of the natural approaches that can be taken beyond that to enhance these situations, to improve upon what we can do with diet. But the fundamental is, it's kind of like the old computer phrase, garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're putting garbage in your mouth, you're going to get a garbage response.
Mm-hmm.
Your body's not going to do well. So by giving yourself proper nutrition through a balanced diet without a lot of sweets, you can improve your health situation. Let's go beyond that. I talked about breathing. I talked about diabetes. How about inflammatory conditions? How about, let's say, an individual who has arthritis? So let's go back to blood sugar now. So if you're eating a lot of sugars, sugars convert to create an acidic environment within your body and can lead to more uric acid, just like the breakdown of animal proteins can lead to more production of uric acid, just like the tannins and tannic acid in teas and coffees can lead to more inflamed conditions and more acidic conditions, more uric acid. So situations like gout, arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis particularly, which is not really quite the same. That's an autoimmune disorder. These kinds of things can be affected by consumption of too much sugar or too much animal protein or too much coffee or tea. So, do you see how the selection of specifics within your diet can affect your health? Each health condition is affected by each of these situations. So, choices matter. Your food matters. If you're going to McDonald's and getting your burger and fries, you are actually fairly rapidly killing yourself. Not even slowly. You're eating trans fats. You're eating dense animal proteins that make your body inflamed and acidic. You're eating, refined flours that also make you acidic and inflamed. All of those things make your situation worse. There you go. So.
It's interesting because I always hear and I always say, oh, well, I don't want to eat processed food over processed food. However, there's, understanding what they are and what they're not. Because it's really difficult because when you're on a budget and you're wanting to eat healthy and you're going out there to buy stuff to eat and what's healthier for you is more expensive, so then you start second guessing with other items that maybe you can substitute with, and still most of this stuff that's out there, even in the freezers, whatever, when you start reading the ingredients, and everything you just mentioned, I'm connecting the dots with my own body again. I keep on saying to myself, yep.
You should replay this on Connect the Dots.
I replay your voice talk every day of my life. You have been in my life now for the last 5 years and have had a huge impact on me and on my health. And still, within 5 years, it's taken me this long to finally start, And I've always known you're right. It's just starting and following the process of making better choices. And that's not easy to do. It's just, within the society we live in, it's so much easier to do everything that's wrong in every aspect of living. Right. So it makes it really hard for one to do.
To give you a little break there, I've been studying, although not formally all of the time, but I've been studying nutrition since I was a teenager. That's when I started getting into nutrition and started reading books on nutrition. I became, early on, at the age of 17, I chose to be a vegetarian. Wow. And I was doing that, but I didn't do a very good job. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I got really ill, and then I started to read. I started to read nutrition books and so on, and I got myself better by learning more about what to take, and definitely turned myself around. And that was an early lesson for me. Before I ever got into this field, I was studying that. It was a hobby at first. Mm-hmm. So, I've been doing this a long time. 17 years. God, that was almost 10 years ago. So, just kidding. But, you know, so give yourself a break. It takes a while sometimes for these things to sink in. Just like we were talking about with other
here's
things.
the problem with that.
Yeah.
Holistic healing is really part of the process, is yes to heal, but at the same time to gain strength and to avoid, to, you know. And the problem is that, as you all said, it takes time. However, a lot of times, because we've done the wrong things for so long, we don't have the same amount of time to reverse things. And that's where people get frustrated also, because I cannot tell you how many times I've heard my brother-in-law say to me, oh, Steve Jobs, look at, he tried to do things naturally and whatever, and look, you wound up dying. And that made me think, what happens is I'm doing the same thing, but in this process of my body being broken now, how I call it, is when I realize the things that are wrong. And now I'm realizing in hindsight the things that created these items, just like hearing you talk right now, I'm thinking, yep. Give you a prime example. Yesterday, I had not eaten anything like usual, and it's now already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I really need to eat something because I start getting nauseous and I don't feel good and blah, blah, blah. So the first thing I saw was a McDonald's, and I go to the drive-thru, and all I bought were the fries.
Oh.
But the good thing is on the fries, the good thing was that on the drive-thru, they show if you purchase a small, the amount of calories. If you purchase a medium size, the amount of calories. So it made me think. I see you shaking your head, but let me just finish the thought. It made me realize that even one thing of fries, of McDonald's fries, is the equivalent to 340 calories. Now that is the calorie intake for a full meal. If you want to count your calories, almost a full meal. So let's say maximum, let's say you do 3 a day meals and you're going for the 1,500 calories a day. So maximum would be 500 calories. When you add on, that was just the fries. So anything else you add on to that is automatically going to bring up your calorie intake. Number 2, I see you cringe when I talk about the fries, and I hear you speak about how that creates inflammations. And a lot of what I have lost all my muscle. Something has been attacking my muscle. I do notice sugar kills me now. So there's just so much to be aware of. So
yes, you need to be eating an anti-inflammatory diet.
So what I wanted to ask the question, you know, leading up to, do you recommend people going to these people that give services of teaching you how to shop and, you know, teaching you how to eat, and or when somebody comes to you, are you able to help also from a nutritional standpoint?
Absolutely. Plus, my my assistant Jen is a nutrition and wellness coach, and so we're setting things up so that she can help to.
So you do recommend that that's part of the process, you know, that people should take in consideration on when you're going.
Absolutely.
Because I know a lot of people also that want to lose weight, they're overweight, they're frustrated with themselves, but they can't change their habits. So they need help. They need coaching.
It may need to be one piece at a time, a little bit at a time. But understanding the choices is really what's important there, right? And what's best, you know, making the best choice and continually refining that until you're really optimal. It takes time.
You look great, by the way. So I need, you know, I'm just looking at you and I'm thinking, yeah, I need to really get on it, because I've seen you also whenever you're not feeling well, how you right away take some action, and obviously, you know, you're doing all the right things, so I know it works. I know it works. I know I've survived this long thanks to following, you know, things I've heard, but I don't want to survive anymore. I want to get better.
I want to thrive.
Last thing that you said last week, I think it was, or the week before, not last week because it was Thanksgiving, but you mentioned the disease of aging. And I'm on and that stuck so much. And now I'm on this new kick of I want to combat the disease of aging.
Absolutely.
Let's fight that disease, and what things can we do? But I'm also, the other part of me feels, wow, you waited so long you know, can you really reverse some of these things?
You can reverse a lot of it, yeah. You can. And I mean, even on a DNA level, you can reverse it. DNA, we're learning that DNA, excuse me, is actually programmable.
I believe that.
That our, you know, things like our stress levels affect our DNA and our telomeres and things like that. So it definitely affects aging.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. Doug is looking at me, I know. For our general public out there,
right.
When they start watching the video.
Okay. So, let's see, where were we?
Sorry about that.
No, what you were talking about was very relevant, you know, and it's important for people to understand the significance of this because, frankly, and I'm really not meaning to bash, again, I'm going to say it, conventional medicine. I'm not meaning to bash conventional medicine, but it's been so long. I've continued to hear back from patients that they're told that their diet doesn't matter. And their diet matters in an extreme way. It's extremely important. But unfortunately, conventional medical people are not getting nutritional training. They're not getting, they're not getting an understanding of how those diet choices make a difference, except for the minimal stuff that everybody knows, like, avoid salt, avoid sugar, these kinds of things. And in some cases, it's avoid fat, which is not good advice. It depends on the fat. There are good fats and there are not so good fats. And there are ways of handling those fats. And there are fats that are actually extremely beneficial. Like, for example, I brought up Alzheimer's earlier. One of the fats that we're seeing is very beneficial is coconut oil for Alzheimer's. And, specifically I'm sorry, having trouble coming up with the word here, but the particular components of the coconut oil, we'll just go with that for now, that help with brain function. Maybe I need some of it right now.
That's it.
So, there's a lot of things that affect our health on many, many levels, every part of our body. And that includes our brains, and that includes things within the brain like psychological function, behavioral function or behavior, and it can be perceptions as well as, verbalization as well as focus. There's so many things, like, this idea that somebody who has ADHD has to be on Ritalin or Adderall or these kinds of things, or ADD, Adderall. These kinds of drugs do a lot of damage and are not necessary, frankly, because there are nutritional approaches to help these people, and there are imbalances there that need to be addressed. And there can be genetic issues as well that can be addressed. There are so many different ways of approaching these things beyond just a drug, and the problem is also that people become dependent on those drugs, so that it not only is a physical dependency, but kind of a reflex to go for the drug, go for the quick fix, instead of understanding that if you treat the root cause, you will get better over time. And even if you are treating the symptoms, just like my approach, treat the symptoms if they're urgent symptoms, yes, but at the same time treat the underlying cause, and that's the focus, is the underlying cause, so that eventually people get better because they respond to the treatment that is addressing the cause of their disorder. And then they can wean off the drugs, because they're not required to fix the problem. They're only treating the symptoms. So, the same can be true in many disorders. You know, I'm talking right now about brain disorders, you know, or psychological behavioral disorders, both of those. You know, ADD, ADHD, these kinds of things, even autism can be addressed to a certain extent. You know, and it really depends on the individual. So that's a deep issue, but there are things that I've been finding in the research. The research has been ongoing regarding those things, and there are approaches that can be taken naturally to help with those situations. And I think I mentioned on the last show an example that keeps popping in my mind when I bring up these subjects was a little kid, a little 3-year-old, who had been diagnosed with ADHD. And I don't recall whether I think they were prescribing Ritalin for him or something along those lines. And I think the parents came to me saying, we don't want our child to have this drug. And so I had a conversation with the little one and listened closely to what he talked about and figured out that there was something that he was describing in his bowel movement. And so I got his mother to bring me a stool sample, and we sent it off to a lab and tested it for several parasites, and he had 2 out of 3 of the parasites. When we got rid of the parasites, he was fine. He was a normal kid. Mm-hmm. And before that, he was literally crawling all over the furniture, you know, practically crawling up the walls. I mean, he was just constant. And he turned into a very calm, easygoing child because we found the root cause of the situation. It wasn't a psychological disorder. It wasn't a behavioral disorder. It was parasites.
Wow.
So if you really look and listen, you'll find that a lot of these situations, if not all, but a lot of them, certainly a lot of them, turn out to be something underlying that condition that needs to be addressed. You address that underlying cause, the root cause, symptoms go away. So, how does that relate to the subject today, which is diet and diet choices? Well, okay, let's think about that. So, I'll just come at it from that point of view. If you're making choices that may have parasites, okay? So, say you're eating sushi. First of all, if you're eating sushi, actual raw fish, be sure to eat the ginger. The ginger is there. I'm sure that the culture that is behind that, I haven't seen this documented. I haven't seen any anthropological evidence of what I'm about to say. However, it just makes sense that that use of ginger with sushi probably evolved from people getting sick, trying ginger, realizing that they would get better or they would avoid becoming sick from the parasites from the fish if they had some ginger with it, because ginger is anti-parasitic. And it also helps with, you know, nausea and these kinds of things. So if you're going to have the raw fish, have the ginger. Unless you have some allergic reaction to that, then maybe you shouldn't be eating raw fish as well. You know, choices like pork. Pork can tend to have parasites as well. So if you're going to eat pork, make sure it's well cooked. I mean, it's kind of disgusting to think about it, but you may be eating these dead parasites while you're eating the pork. The same idea with certain kinds of fish. You know, I've already talked about parasites in the fish. Well, especially warm water fish, you're going to see a lot of parasites. Like grouper. Groupers, you know, great tasting fish, very common in Florida, People love their grouper, but a lot of the grouper has worms in it in the center, typically in the area of the spinal column, you know, in that area. So there may be parasites in the fish itself. Yeah. So lovely stuff. But so your choices matter. And unfortunately, we have kind of an ostrich mentality about these kinds of issues sometimes. You know, when you hear people say, oh, well, you know, if you say something might, you know, be carcinogenic, you hear, oh, well, everything causes cancer, you know. No, everything doesn't cause cancer. You know, if you truly focus and educate yourself about these issues, you can make much better choices and be more healthy in the long run and in the short run. You know, you may experience much less inflammation, for example, much less joint pain if you're arthritic. You may be having angina even. You know, there may be issues in your cardiovascular system or your heart which can be improved simply by changing your diet. If you change your diet appropriately, there's lots of evidence, lots of research showing that, for example, a plant-based diet can turn cardiovascular issues around. Lots. A plant-based diet can turn those situations around. You know, and one of the problems with this reflexed surgery, you know, the bypass surgery, is that, again, there's not enough counseling about diet. You know, these folks are going to a heart surgeon. The heart surgeon, you know, gives them a coronary bypass operation, and then they just go back to the same lifestyle, and they have another one in 10 years, you know. They have a heart attack. You know, they haven't changed anything. They're just treating the symptoms. Even with the operation, they're just treating the symptoms. That's a symptom. You know, that they're getting heart blockage, that they're getting blockages in their carotids or things like that. These are symptoms of a disease situation that's partly due to their diet, if not completely. Sometimes it can be genetically related as well. But the diet is an important factor. And making good choices makes a big difference on your longevity and your quality of life. And really, that's, to me, what it's about, is living a quality life later in life as well. You know what I mean? Going further, yes. Want to live longer? Some people say they don't want to live to be a certain age. Well, if you're just as healthy as you are now, assuming you're healthy, that might change your perspective. So that's the kind of goals we're talking about here, beyond any particular health condition. So food choices make a big difference. And then beyond that, of course, specifics regarding the nutrition that comes from that food. But the food choices can focus on the basics, like how much fat, how much sugar, you know, how much salt, these kinds of things, which kinds of fat. We don't want the trans fats. We don't want too much saturated fat unless it's used appropriately. Like saturated fat being cooked is different from saturated fat being consumed cold all the time. It's different. But the saturated fat is what you want to cook with. Why? Because if you cook with unsaturated fats like vegetable oils, you're creating trans fat. It changes molecularly and transfigures to become trans fat. So, let's see, we've talked about diabetes, we've talked about blood sugar regulation, we've talked a little bit about cardiovascular, we've talked about arthritis. We could talk about metabolic issues in general, because you know, metabolic syndrome is a very growing aspect of all this, and diabetes is becoming epidemic. So that's tied into it. Also, hypertension is, high cholesterol or hypercholesterolemia. All these things are tied together. And metabolism has a lot to do with all of it. If your metabolism is sluggish, if you're not absorbing the nutrients very well, then they're not going to be able to do the work to repair your body, to repair your cells, to improve your body's function, which is part of the job of those antioxidants, is to take all those free radicals that are created both by natural processes in your body, even the act of breathing, as well as exposure to toxins in our environments. We're talking about everything from fumes from cars to makeup on women, to the use of plastics, drinking bottles, all of the BPAs and all of these kinds of things that are all xenoestrogens or toxic in some way or another, the parabens in the makeup, etc. These all affect us and create higher levels of toxic load on our bodies. That means that there's more work for our livers to do to detox our bodies, to clean out the blood, etc. There's more work for our kidneys to do. So we need to try to minimize those loads as well. But I'm getting a little off track from diet. So, although I was thrown a loop a few months ago, I was trying out a natural, supposedly natural, herbal combination that was supposed to be a tonic, and it's from a company up in Canada that I thought was good. And I was trying out this tonic just to see if it could be helpful for patients. And so I tried it out, and I read it quickly, looking at all the natural ingredients. But what I missed was there was a section saying that they had used preservatives, and the specific preservatives they had used were parabens. So here I was drinking parabens as part of what I was drinking in that supposed tonic. So needless to say, I stopped using that, and I'm not recommending it to my patients. So, but parabens can be in the food. So parabens can be in the food. Other preservatives can be in the food that can cause trouble. Just like preservatives can be in other applications, such as vaccinations. Preservatives, including the thimerosal, which contain methyl mercury, which is very damaging, a heavy metal, and can lead to thyroid problems and other sorts of problems, especially if used for the very young, can affect brain development and this kind of thing. So we need to be careful about what we put in our bodies in many senses. We're absorbing through the largest organ in our bodies all the time. That's our skin. Our skin is absorbing these toxins all the time. And so that gives our bodies some work to do to clean out. We don't want to add to that load by eating, frankly, garbage, putting garbage in our mouths that is toxic as well, that gives our liver so much work to do, on top of what we're already doing nowadays, because we have various forms of pollutions that are just accepted in our culture. You know, we think we're doing good work at getting rid of pollution, but in point of fact, we actually have many forms of pollutants that are not being addressed adequately. You know, like the use of the parabens is banned in Europe, but allowed in the US. These kinds of things. So, but in terms of metabolic issues, if your metabolism is sluggish, for example, you want to avoid some things. You want to avoid tap water that is fluoridated or chlorinated or both. You want to avoid baked goods that may have been baked using the tap water that has fluoride and chlorine. You certainly don't want to swallow your fluoride toothpaste if you're using fluoride toothpaste. Or you might look for another option, like a baking soda-based toothpaste instead. Such as Tom's. I'll just say a brand here. Tom's is something to look at. So you want to make choices, again, that can help to keep you from affecting your metabolism in a negative way. So things made with the tap water that has fluoride and chlorine, or the water itself, you want to avoid. So baked goods also have something else. They have bromates and bromides. These also are in the same category of chemical as fluoride and chlorine. And they all run down thyroid function. So therefore they affect your metabolism, slow your thyroid, slow your processing and your absorption of nutrients, all of these kinds of things. So there are so many levels to these choices. It's no wonder we have so many sick people. And unfortunately, the focus of our government organizations that are supposed to be focused on protecting the health of the people is not on these situations. So it's up to us all to become more aware. And, you know, I'm constantly watching out for new things that may be involved, may be going on. But I'm also informing my patients regularly of these kinds of situations that may affect their health. So, food choices matter, definitely. And so, try not to have too much of the turkey for sure, and you know, too much of that cranberry sauce with all that high fructose corn syrup. In fact, just avoid that altogether, I'd suggest. And you know, make good choices, lots of good vegetables and fruit. Steamed vegetables are great in all cases. So, you know, these kinds of things. Try to make good choices. Look up glycemic index. Look at glycemicindex.com to start becoming more aware of what the glycemic index of each food choice that you choose is. And that concludes the show for today. So,
see, what do we have about next week? Any idea?
We'll work on it.
All right.
We don't know yet. So you've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. If you'd like to check into the practice, it's, first of all, the website is aptw.net. That's the shortcut, short for A Path to Wellness, aptw.net. Or you can give us a call at 727-329-9637. And we look forward to hearing from you, and let us know what you thought of our show. Talk to you next time.